Welcome to the EverSky Developer Diary number 1. So this week I've been working on land chunks. Well, I've been working on this for a couple of weeks actually. And what you're seeing here is me prototyping the idea in 3ds Max. So what I was doing was using a thing called Subdivision Surfaces. They use a thing called a Cat-Clark subdivision. And what they do is allow you to take any quad and split it down the middle basically and create 4 more quads from it. And if you do that a few times, you get a number of sort of faces. And then you see here I've applied a noise modifier to that, and it only does the noise in the Y direction, and you can change a bunch of different parameters for the seed of the generator. And what I was doing here was trying to get a feel for the kind of things I could do with the land, and this was going to intentionally this was going to be sort of I was going to prototype it in 3ds Max and then write the code to do this kind of thing. So you see me here playing around with a few parameters, and what I'm looking for is kind of a nice rough base bottom to the piece of land. So when I've done that, I've decided to select the topmost faces. So anything that's pointing upwards, I select that and then scale those faces down. And what this gives you is a sort of nice flat land chunk. The idea is that you want it flattened off so that people could actually live on it, and these are the sort of habitable chunks. So what you see here is really kind of an example fragment, and you know you can see how that would reasonably kind of be a reasonable way of generating new fragments by just applying the noise on top of this kind of subdivision surface schema, and then scaling the top, anything that's pointing upwards. So then I figured I'd have a look at texturing that, and I loaded up my texture editor, RenderMonkey, and texture editor, my shader editor, and the idea is that basically you write a little bit of shader code and then apply it to a model, and this editor is a way of testing those kind of ideas out. Now what you'll see here is that so that the actual shading of the model, these aren't the best textures obviously, but the shading of the model is basically dependent on the world space position, or rather this sort of world to object space position. So you could change the orientation of the model, but the textures stay the same. So anything that's kind of pointing upwards would get an upwards sort of texture, and the same for the 3 different axes, X, Y, and Z. And the idea for this is that you can basically use this sort of triplanar texturing kind of thing, and that would work globally for any kind of land fragment. So basically this was going to be an entirely procedural kind of approach to things. But I decided that I didn't really like that, because there were a few issues in terms of using normal maps and those kind of things. So I went back to the drawing board, and I decided to have a look at using Mudbox for this kind of thing. So just to sort of prototype this kind of thing up again, I created again a subdivision surface, subdivided it a few times. And the good thing about Mudbox is that you can actually tell it to only draw or deform the vertices on the y-axis. So you see me here kind of just painting over the surface of an object. And that's kind of useful, right? Because then, this approach is basically what you use for like high poly, low to high poly modeling in normal kind of AAA games. And it's kind of useful here because it's like painting on a height field, right? It's like interactive painting on a height field, but the height field is actually kind of a base mesh. I can subdivide that mesh and I can pull the vertices around if I want to. I really like this this approach. It makes sense to use Mudbox or 3D Coat or ZBrush for these kind of things. And of course you can do the usual operations, smoothing things out, adding noise. You can see that there's a lot of editing potential. So one of the problems with this kind of approach is that if you look at the UV coordinates, I have to step down in the resolution here, so each of these is subdivision level. And what I'm going to show you is that the UV coordinate, the default one that Mudbox generates, when you look at it, is basically like a flat cube map, so it's 6 side faces, so you get 6 cubes. But obviously with a land chunk, a land fragment, it doesn't really look like a cube anymore, right? So I took that and exported that level into 3D Coat, which is another 3D sort of modeling, painting, subdivision surface application, and generated some new UV coordinates for it. And this is the result I get back. So I've kind of just painted this, and I'll show you the tools for painting in a second, but I've just painted this land fragment in Mudbox again. So 3D Coat was there just to generate the UV coordinates. And I'll show you the different subdivision levels. If you go up a level, basically the top level for this particular fragment was 1.5 million polygons. So this is the UV layout. You can see it's a lot different from before. It's not just 6 cubes. And the great thing about Mudbox is that you can do a thing called projection painting with it. So once the UV coordinates are all set, you can basically take the geometry, and you can using a thing called a stencil brush, you can actually just paint on it. So I'll show you that here. So basically you take this texture and you kind of draw through the texture, and you can see there's a little bit of effect here. Maybe need to up the settings a bit for that, so it's a little bit too subtle perhaps, a little bit too big. So maybe what I should do is kind of up the magnitude a little, and then you can see it coming through a little bit more, but again the actual texture size is a bit too big, so you can scale the texture down and paint through. Maybe scale the texture a bit finer and paint through that again. So you can see that basically the painting of the textures is going to be really simple, right? It's very quick to get a feeling that you want. So that's basically the process I think we're going to use is take a sort of hand painted approach to some of the land fragments, but actually generate the procedurally generate the fragment placement rather than fragments themselves. And just to show you that in the game, of course the whole point of this is to get a sort of usable geometry, and I haven't put any detail maps on these fragments yet, so eventually you'll get some detail in there as well. But this is just me kind of jumping around on a couple of fragments that I've been playing with. And so to show you the kind of idea of the game, you're kind of essentially going to be using these ships to glide around the world with. So this is kind of almost the starting representation of what the world is like. So you can basically, from first person view, you can run around the world, and then you can jump into your ship and fly off. And here I'm showing you the physics meshes for the actual kind of, so the ships are basically a box right now. It's not very controllable, but you've got the physics mesh and the AI geometry mesh, the sort of navigation mesh on top of that. So there's still an awful long list of things to do. Obviously I need to generate a whole bunch of different land fragments. I need to figure out a way of actually getting out of the ship and making that ship transition a lot nicer. Right now you press the G key or right click and press the enter vehicle button, but I don't really like that approach right now. There's a whole bunch of issues in terms of the fragments themselves. You'll see as we're getting a little bit further away, there's kind of a texture bitmap problem that kind of shows across on the texture of the land. And of course this ship is kind of only a placeholder, so that really needs redoing, proper textures on it and stuff. But hopefully you can see that it's starting to feel like it might start to be a world. I can see how the land fragment thing will work. The art for that should be reasonably easy, and I can create a few hundred of those different types of fragments, and there'll be a whole bunch of procedural generated stuff as well. And so the next thing is to really work on the physics of the ship and get that so that it feels a lot nicer, and actually get the coordinate system working so that the world can be a lot bigger, because it's going to be cell based, so you move from one cell to another, but you won't really necessarily see that. But the idea was to generate some of the cells on the fly as you're exploring the universe of this game. It's a huge kind of space, so it procedurally generates kind of as you're exploring. So anyway, that's it for now, and I'll show you some more next time. So thank you for watching. Obviously you can watch everything we do on mindflock.com, or you know, have a look at me on ZoomerPup on Twitter. Get in touch if you feel like it. And of course, background music is by AD. It's kind of nice. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.